Welcome to The Adoption Curve, the show where we explore how leading organizations are transforming their approach to turn technology adoption into a strategic advantage. In each episode, we'll sit down with a learning and enablement practitioner to get their inside story on how they're helping their organizations adopt and maximize their technology investments. Let's dive into today's episode. Kevin, welcome to the show.
Thanks, man. Happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me on.
Yeah, we're excited to have you on this conversation. I know we talk a lot on this show about the sort of internal perspective from an adoption standpoint, getting folks to buy into process and systems and different tech. But you and I always have these conversations, just the two of us, around the sort of external side of this, and that this is an audience and a view that maybe we don't talk about enough. And so I wanted to have you on to actually kind of formalize this conversation a bit. So I was hoping maybe you could spend a minute or two kind of giving us a little bit about your background. You've been a part of some very interesting communities out there, and I'd love to have your perspective, but give us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see where this conversation goes, but I can't help but think I don't think there's as big of a distinction between internal and external, through this lens as maybe folks would imagine, right? Like, oh yeah, you're trying to orient folks to like systems and process and tech. Like, yeah, you're solving the same problems on the external side too. And so I'm sure we'll talk more about that. But yeah, so I'm currently at a software company called Airtable. We're a no-code app platform, and I oversee the teams and programs on the customer education front. So Airtable Academy. And then our community, so Airtable community as well. Been here for a little over a year. We actually launched Airtable Academy actually right around like this time last year, and then kind of pushed it live for all users, all customers for free over in the fall. So Academy, as you would normally think about it, self-paced on-demand education videos, a certification program. Maybe at the time of this, when this goes live, we may have achieved our 3rd certification. So we're keeping tabs on that. And then on the community front, the traditional customer community forum experience you're familiar with. We do a number of events, office hour style, and through our user groups, which are, communities of practice. And we just launched an Airtable MVPs program. So it's becoming less of like a community program. And Airtable community is very much like an umbrella term for like a collection of communal programs, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? But prior to Airtable, I was at HubSpot, 8+ years or so, primarily on the HubSpot Academy team, and just leading the folks responsible for, education, certifications, accreditations for the global partner ecosystem around HubSpot. So a lot of seller content, developer content, architecture, personas, that type of stuff. That's it, man. That's me. I don't know. Based out of Boston, a PMP certified, and hosted a longtime host of Agency Unfiltered, a podcast that, interviewed agency owners and founders in the HubSpot space about growth and scale. But that's all I got, man.
I love it. Yeah, I've always enjoyed your perspective, and certainly looking at the time spent at HubSpot, what an incredible community built there, and some of the most passionate folks in B2B that you'll see. So cool to see you're taking that same concept into Airtable.
I mean, HubSpot and Airtable are similar in that, like, we were creating the passion and the enthusiasm from the users of the product. That just happened organically, like rabid, avid fans and power users. All we could do is try and channel that energy and passion, to power our content and like uplift the wider ecosystem. So I don't know how much credit I could take for the community around these platforms, but we very much collaborated and put a spotlight on a lot of those folks.
Yeah, that's an interesting theme that I want to try to cover here today too. It's really, like you said, you're not going to manufacture some of that passion, but certainly capturing and channeling it into programs that can scale, or programs that can sort of be self-fulfilling, right? If I can capture passion here, capture expertise, and then other folks can start to grab that, you're using evergreen content, and you'll see that theme that we'll talk about here today to sort of be a flywheel to get to the next set of users and the next set of content. And these things start to sort of unravel from there. So I thought it was a really interesting way that HubSpot's done this through content. You look on LinkedIn, I feel like half of my feed is folks sharing that. Airtable has a similar community in that sense too. So I know most folks are going to be listening to this. They're not going to be at that level of scale. They may be very early on in thinking about from the customer side, or an external, maybe a partner enablement program, or, an adoption program they're trying to have for a service that they offer, or some sort of, software product they have. So if we back up a little bit and you think about this more in terms of the early days, first off, like, when would an org think about making something formalized from a customer ed or an external ed standpoint?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, the rule of thumb is you always want to address these things proactively versus reactively. I think like that's ultimately going to be, the most beneficial approach from like the customer experience overall. And I would also soften like the term formalize, right? Like everyone needs a formalized, scaled customer success strategy and motion, formalized, I don't want to like overinflate exactly how formal, some of these like early programs and systems and approaches can be, right? I've always taken an approach of like, you got to crawl before you can walk and you got to walk before you can run. And so really it comes down to like finding the places where you can start to crawl and or walk. But to your question, I would say like when's timing right? Like things to look out for. If there's any sort of semblance of a repeatable onboarding motion, regardless of how actually like well documented it is or how like externalized it is to customers, but if you're seeing that there is becoming repeatable components for onboarding, that's usually indicative of you're ready for some educational resources, community resources, etc. I would say like if you're looking to build and grow a scaled CS function, right? I think like today, right now more than ever, especially in like technology and SaaS, like everyone is trying to figure out how to do more with less and to have our, resources and customer journeys be less human intensive, right? And so again, customer education and some of these other programs would slot in there. I would tap into like your CSMs or anybody that talks to customers, the folks on the front line. When are they getting like questions that are starting to become repetitive, or they have like a canned answer that they deliver every time? Or like when are support tickets starting to correlate to like themes and patterns? Like when are like the point and click tours of your product starting to become a little more like not rehearsed, but just like predictable? Like all of those types of things, like those are signals to tell you you're ready for customer education, especially.
Yeah, for sure. Obviously, it's going to vary wildly depending on the product size, the contract value, the segment, all those sort of things.
Totally.
So it sounds like you're saying more of that like FAQ, like quick win versus maybe like a formalized like course for onboarding or supportive mechanism for onboarding. Do you think of it in that way, or is it more dependent on like product segment?
I would actually think about it like maybe this is more of a spectrum, right? And so like I think everything we just kind of packaged up would be one side of the spectrum where it's like, man, we should just package these up as like on-demand resources, right? Like in quick wins, like known journeys, FAQ style. On the other side, right, I would, with a little more complexity would be like, the overall positioning and value add of your product or products, right? Like the overall value prop, and like how do you properly engage and extract value out of the use of your product? And so like a question here is like, hey, before a user jumps into my product, do they need to have some sort of like mindset or framework or methodology before they actually have to start concerning themselves with like, well, how do I actually go execute, right? I think like this is a really good example of Airtable, where like if you've never built on a no-code platform before, right? Before you jump in and start figuring out how to solution it in Airtable, well, you should probably have an understanding maybe of like relational databases, entity relationship diagramming. Like, okay, how do I kind of design out a workflow? What are the swim lanes? What's task ownership look like? Which tasks are dependent on others? And like the better you are of that exercise, the more effective app you'll end up building in Airtable. And so it's like, again, I think that is something where, well, customer education can fit that bill and align folks to the appropriate strategies, approaches, mindsets, right? So maybe, again, spectrum, and that's on the other side of it.
Yeah, I really like that. And you mentioned here before we got on, talking about the like how to think versus how to do. I really like that call out. I think that's really helpful because it's almost giving folks we call it like a key or a map. You're looking at a doc, you're looking at a screen for the first time. It's like, what the hell am I even looking at here? Before you start telling me what to do, it's like I need to be oriented to the experience. I think that's very interesting that you're talking about it from like the value prop standpoint. Makes sure to tie that together. I can definitely see that being lost in support articles and Academy, where it's just like very click heavy. Very, this comes from IRAD, who sells a tool about where to click on the screen, right? But we do find the most successful content that we see are the ones that have a really great overview before they get into something that's just really setting context at a very deep level before they're giving the level of instruction. Sounds like you guys kind of align to that as well.
Yep. Yeah, and it's value prop is always like a tricky term. Because, the customer education purists are, like the purpose of an academy isn't to align you to value props. We're not trying to sell you the product. The assumption is that you're ready to use the product. And so we're trying to bring you through the journey, whether it starts in product or if it starts as like a mindset, right? But it's like, hey, we're not here to show the flashy feature functions and that, it's like, we're ready to talk about integration or implementation. But then to your point too, there is definitely a difference between customer education, regardless of the format of how you deliver it, from like help centers or like knowledge base articles. And so again, like another example here with Airtable, we just launched the learning path about AI, right? Like how to strategize, identify places for embedding AI into your workflow. How do you actually go and implement it? And so, we want to make sure that customer education tells you or teaches you the best practices around like prompt engineering. What makes a good prompt? How do you templatize prompts? How do you extract the outputs you need based on the inputs you put in? And then we can point to the Help Center article on how to actually create a new AI assist field in Airtable, right? That's a great Help Center article. And again, it complements the education really, really well.
Yeah, that's a really good call out. And yeah, value prop's probably the wrong word, but it comes from a pre-sales guy, so that happens.
I won't blame you for it. It's a good, yeah, exactly. I think I used it too, but yeah, I mean, we always say like, customer education isn't to just like highlight the value props. We're assuming that conversation's been had or decision's been made. And so let's talk about how to find value, realize value and ROI with our product, now that you're here.
It's probably a much better framing there. I also think about this as like, once you've purchased this particular tool or whatever you've subscribed to here, you've effectively just like adopted a methodology, right? The tool is set up to be used in a specific way. It might be like a no-code tool like Airtable or a Notion or like these things that are be wildly configurable, but there's like limits to those things. There's also just a set of methods in which it's designed to be used. And so I think it's more overtaking like, okay, well, you bought based on these assumptions of what you're trying to accomplish, end goal of what that, like, you're here, we want to get you there. Let's show you sort of how the tool is going to execute on those things, bearing in mind that this is the methodology we're going to get to. We do find that from time to time where folks are really trying to bend the tool to kind of do a thing it's not really designed for. And then they're looking for articles that are not going to exist almost, or looking for resources that are not there.
Dude, totally. I would, and honestly, like, that's a really great place to probably like focus your efforts or start. Like, hey, we're trying to formalize our scaled CS motion. We want to start like really investing in customer education. And so it's like, there's going to be a wide array, a diverse array of use cases, maybe industries or verticals, like business functions that are looking to implement your tool. And you'll never be able to like build education for all of them. However, there is going to be some foundational content that you should cover. And like there's going to be a lot of consistencies, right? Like your team should know what successful product adoption looks like, right? Like what are the key steps or thresholds a user has to pass, or like what tools within your product do they have to string together to come off as like activated, right? We always talk about like customer activation, or like, hey, what truly does a healthy customer look like, right? Like what actions, what workflows that go throughout your tool, like what are all of the positive signs for your team to show like, oh man, that's a healthy customer. Oh, that's a successful account. Oh, they've onboarded, they've timed, the value is there. And like, again, diverse array of use cases, like you could build content that solves for that foundational journey.
Yeah. I think that's a great point. This might be slightly off topic, but I'm just thinking of it because it's relevant in the moment of the justification for these programs tends to be quite difficult, right? To allocate resources, figure out how they're good, especially if it's the first time this has ever been done. And it's like, oh, just push them to that old article we have, or somebody update that thing that we have and send people there, right? Sometimes, it's difficult to kind of sort of get that buy-in. I'd be curious from your experiences at these two orgs, have you ever seen this resource library of an academy, whatever it's all put together as, be almost leveraged by the pre-sales team? Like, hey guys, when you buy, like, this is what you're going to get, right? Look at this like repository of value that's there. Anything come to mind there?
No, 100%. And so I think like, a lot of education programs or academies, like they oftentimes do live in the CS function. Obviously, they sometimes live in the marketing function too, if there's like more of an emphasis on like demand gen. But I think like the best academies or the best program managers that lead their academies are positioning their resources to the pre-sales team or like sales team to bring up to prospects or prospective customers. Like, absolutely. I don't think you gate the academy until someone's like become a customer. I won't be able to like recite the exact metrics, but we had analysis back with HubSpot Academy, and we saw that, prospects that had a user go through Academy, they would close faster, they would close for more, they would get started quicker, realize value faster. Like they were just like healthy prospects, and their deals had greater velocity. Like there's a huge value add there. And so, yeah, again, maybe it's customer education. There's very much a role to play in the pre-sales motion for.
Always found that strange when people gated that content, till after they became a customer, this like lock and key method. And it's like, if I am buying something, I see that there's that level of support in addition to what you're promising me with implementation. I'm just like so much more aligned to go, hey, this is something that like I feel like there is precedent for, and I'm following a path, and I can self-serve when the person can't get back to me for 24 hours, or that CSM or whatever those things are. So yeah, I definitely agree. I'm glad that's not something foreign to Motorworks.
And I think there's a whole like story to tell with data there too, right? And again, assuming that you have like the reporting infrastructure in place and like the metrics are available to overlay. Maybe you're a product-led growth company. Maybe there's like a free SKU that you drive a ton of signups for. But like, what does Academy or educational resource engagement do for upgrades or like the entry point into your free product? Like, I think there is a whole pipe gen and sales acceleration story to tell if you have the data available to do so, for sure.
That's an excellent point. In terms of when we think about the success metrics, you mentioned that like you have to kind of think through what that looks like for your org, obviously. I know you were mentioning to me before just the thoughts around, think about those core personas and like the customer journey. You also mentioned to me kind of this idea of like day zero, moving through the value chain. Can you expand upon that a little bit? Because I think it's a really key point here is to actually underscore like what success is going to look like here.
Yeah, I think like, it's, you never want to fall victim to like analysis paralysis. And again, kind of echoing the sentiment of like, all right, where can we at least start to like crawl and walk before we run? And like, we have to start somewhere. We have to solve this blank page problem. And so if you're just trying to take your first crack at like, okay, let's build a customer education curriculum. We're going to build a resource library. We're going to build videos. Like, where in the world do we start? Right. And it's really just like the prioritization framework. And it's like, well, what are the key milestones or like high impact moments that need to occur through the customer journey, and like start there, right? Day zero is like, to your point, like, hey, they've walked into their new house. Like, how do they know where to go? Or like, how can they just like get started as fast as possible, right? What is the onboarding journey? How long does it take? What are the sub milestones there? Like, yeah, support that with videos. And ultimately, where's the greatest value realization to be had, right? I think, like with Airtable, we have a whole database layer, right? It's tables, and the power of relational databases is so real. But I think the real value realization happens when somebody engages with our interface designer. So this is like user-facing, like sleek design, like super like clean UX. So somebody can like interface with the app that you've powered with your data. Like, that's a huge value realization moment. And so naturally, that's going to be where we focused our early education, right? Same thing with like the AI functionality, right? And so again, it's really just where and how you get started and how you prioritize the content creation. I can go down this rabbit hole if you want to. You mentioned reporting. I talk a lot about kind of this like 5 category framework that our team uses, and it's worked pretty well for us. It's helped us like stay narrow. I think there is a thing, like a real thing of like too much data analysis or like too many leading indicators. And so we try and stay hyper focused on like a concentrated reporting framework, and how deep you want to go on that, I'm happy to.
Yeah, I'd love to unpack that, because I found that really interesting, that category framework. So I'd love for you, if you're open to it, to kind of just go through how you guys think about that.
Yeah, so I mean, it very much starts with like, leading indicators, and then it clearly goes down to like lagging indicators, or like reporting on the true quantifiable impact on the business. And so again, through the lens of Airtable Academy, self-paced on-demand content, we have certifications, right? Starts at creator capacity. That's like the top level for us. Like, are we accurately designing quarterly sprints? Are we maintaining the level of productivity that we're planning? Like, how does the output look? Like, we want to be consistent with the amount of videos that our team either creates net new or updates, right? So you start with creator capacity. How are you operating, right? You go down to learner sentiment. So it's like, the CSAT or the net promoter score. Like, what's the overall learner perception of your content? Are they registering for your academy? Are they starting to enroll in your courses, right? I think this is like a good benchmark on how well you've defined those core personas, and how you're kind of like translating that onboarding journey or learning journey into your academy. Sentiment goes into learner experience. So it's like, hey, once they enroll, once they get started, is it meeting their expectations all the way through, right? Do course enrollments become course completions? Is there like a drop off on video engagement? Are users starting to subscribe or register for multiple courses or multiple learning paths, right? Again, it's like, are you delivering valuable education, actionable education? Is it translating to adoption of the product, right? Next one down is credentials growth, right? We issue certifications. We want to see that grow month over month, quarter over quarter. We love seeing multi-certified users, right? And I think there's this whole like social amplification, like virality benefit of this. You want to make it as easy as possible to like post on LinkedIn, add to your LinkedIn profiles, add to your community profiles. And then the last one here is revenue impact, right? Like I think your boss, your boss's boss, your boss's boss's executive boss, they're ultimately going to want to make sure that, you know, the efforts you're putting into the academy, the investment of time and resources is translating to positive ROI for the business. So product adoption leads to renewal retention leads to account growth or expansion. And I'll just say this super quick, and then you can poke holes into my framework, but lagging indicators are clearly going to be what matters most to this executive audience, right? Again, positive ROI. However, you need this sort of like framework of navigating your leading indicators, because if you're not mastering those and having demonstrable growth in those, then your lagging indicators could really just be dumb luck, right? Like your story should be hitting green on all of your leading indicators, you know, attributes and validates your efforts back to the positive ROI again, if you have it.
Very well said. I love that. That's a really helpful framework to be thinking about this. I think it also takes it from everything from like almost like an agile framework for how to execute this stuff from like project management all the way through to effectively like change management or the level of making a way to tie to impact. Like what is the one sentence email you can send to the executive that like this worked? You know, like sometimes we talk about like has to be so simplified to the higher up the food chain you go, but down to your level it has to be like, okay, what is actual like, capacity look like to start this thing? And I think folks can get unraveled just in those early stages of just thinking about that, especially if it's early, especially if it's not a dedicated program. CE function, the average org, like they're not going to have this as like a dedicated hire to start. This is going to be something they're grow into. Maybe they steal resources from like internal L&D or instructional designers somewhere. So I'd be curious just from that point specifically.
Yeah.
How do you think about like the friction points they're hitting, right? Like we find this all the time, like, oh, I don't have the skill sets. Like, how am I going to build this first like set of content? Like this is sort of overwhelming just on the small, you know, that capacity conversation.
Yeah, you know, it's a good question. You bring up a good point about like internal L&D and some other folks. Like, you know, I always tell my folks, like, you don't have to be the deepest product experts of the product we're building education on. You should be looking to become an expert of what it means to be building educational content for our academy and for our users. Because if you look around you, again, depending on the size, you know, organization or maturity of the company you work for, you know, maybe you have CSMs, right? Maybe you do have internal L&D. Maybe you do have architects or engineers or solutions consultants. Maybe you have like pro services folks, implementation. Like take a look around at the org and you know, enroll these known subject matter experts to help collaborate and bring this content to life, right? And so, you know, our commitment was always like, we're going to take on all of the lift as it relates to like curriculum development, right? Like you don't have to learn our you know, curriculum development methodology, what it means to write video scripts, how to determine when it's a talking head versus a product tutorial. Like we're going to take all that away. All we need is to extract all of the expertise and knowledge from your brain. That's a pretty symbiotic relationship, and that's probably like the number one hack. And if anybody listening to this is in the customer education space, I don't think that's, you know, a wildly revolutionary take. Like I think most folks know that that's where it happens.
The subject matter expert extraction, we always call it internally, because we were just on a call yesterday with an org, and they were saying the same thing. Like, I'm petrified to go to my SMEs and like ask for anything more, you know, because we already did this 2 quarters ago, and it was a brutal experience for X, Y, and Z. And so, you know, shameless plug, but we're always trying to use like, what's the low friction tools? What's the, you know, the capturing capacity when we're using things like IRAD? Like, you literally won't even know what's going. It should be in the background to just like extract your process. We'll do all the cleanup. We'll do the frameworks. We'll do the resetting. Seems like that's kind of aligned with how you guys think about it too.
Well, yeah, I think there's a kind of a branching, you know, piece here of like, well, what asset types are you mapping to the topics you want to create content around? And there's a whole slew of like, you know, decisions or questions you have to ask yourself or decisions you have to make to like determine that. You think, you know, our mix is primarily video, right? Self-paced on-demand video. We have the interactive tutorials powered by IORAD. We do have some text-based assets in there. And again, I think a lot of academies, customer education programs to start skew more on text. We just know that that's easier. You don't need as much you don't need any video editor, video production specialties in-house to make that happen. And then once you kind of prove out the early concept, you can start to move, well, which ones should be videos, right? A good rule of thumb for us too is, I think you said this at the top of the discussion, but like evergreen, right? Like software, Airtable, like many others, right, changes all the time. Features and functions are always being pushed out net new, or enhancements are made. And so like it can become really laborious to have to update, long videos that do like home screen walkthroughs every single time something changes or like a button changes. And so I think like, hey, when should that be a text asset, or when should that be an embedded IORAD in our academy? So it's, hey, the rate of change, the likelihood of change, when is something so critical that we need to make sure they understand the point and click versus a visualization versus just like a bulleted list of instructions, right? And so again, all that to be said, just map the right asset type to the right topic and you'll find the lift way lighter, like to get going.
Yeah, you're a carpenter, right? You've got a tool belt worth of things you got to be able to use. There's no one answer that's going to, collectively solve all these things. Sometimes you need a screwdriver or hammer or whatever it's going to be. So like, I think the need for the flexibility, I think, is really helpful. I'm glad you brought up the concept of sort of like version control. This is a big one we hear specifically around any kind of product internally. We just bought SAP or X solution and there's all this change happening. Like we don't own that change. That's one set of challenges. In this world, it's more like my education and like support resources are at odds with the rapid product development, right? And we're just constantly trying to catch up with what they're doing.
It's a good problem to have,
Yeah.
It's a good, you want a product team firing on all cylinders like that. And so it's like, yeah, dude, like asset type's going to be an approach you need to take. Again, not something like super, it's not a hot take, but like, yeah, modularity, right? Your videos, like they should be short. It's much easier to snip out a 2-minute, 3-minute video than it is to find like it's a 17-minute, walkthrough of the product. Like, yeah, so you got to keep a short form. That's just going to feel manageable. And then again, talking about relationships you need to have internally, be really effective strategic partners with product and product marketing, right? Get a seat at the table, understand and have visibility into the roadmap so you can start to forecast this stuff ahead of launch, right? And so maybe you don't immediately swap over your content the day of launch. If anybody listening has been able to do that 100% like reliably, I'd love to know. That's the hardest part. But like at least you can start putting the planning in place and be a fast follow for launches or for new launches. And one thing that we do, again, we power a lot of our processes with Airtable. And so again, obviously we're all going to be drinking our own champagne. So the Academy's operating system is on Airtable. Our product development team is on Airtable. And so we've actually built an integration between our two bases. And so anytime a new project is added to their roadmap, as long as it meets certain criteria, it'll trigger a notification back over to us and add it to our prioritization queue and flag the associated courses that we would have to update, right? And so there's a system solution here, maybe down like it's probably a little more of like, I know we're talking a ton about early setup, so maybe it's a little further along in program maturity, but systems, you can't discount the value add they bring to making that work. Versioning, right?
That's beautiful. I love that concept. Any advice you'd have for the folks who are trying to make that relationship or start that conversation? We always talk about the value chain here, where I know that the product team who's developing this, they care about people using the thing that they build. And if you can tell the story, like we're here to help with that concept, any advice or feedback you'd add that you've seen to be successful with kind of like the cross-departmental buy-in?
Yeah, I mean, it's just probably any stakeholder relationship or collaborator relationship. You should lead with the value you bring to them before you start to try and extract value back. And so, I wouldn't start with like, hey, I need a seat at the table because I need my content accurate. It's more so like, hey, why don't we, we're going to dedicate a component of our catalog to this launch. Here's the audience we're going to deliver it to. And we're going to be able to point back, right, interest and adoption of the products that you're being goaled on, right? So it's like, again, I would align the relationship to the metrics or to the initiatives that matter to them, right? Make sure you obviously meet those. And then, once you have proof, right, of the value you and the Academy bring, okay, now it becomes a little more like bi-directional of like, how do we like properly codify this, right?
Yeah. Last point on the version control one. One of the things we've been hearing from folks is around this balance between like customer journey and how they're interacting with that content. So if you think about it, like it's first time I'm coming into Airtable in my first 90 days. I'm going through an academy, and it's effectively a ramp, right? I'm trying to get up to some level of success and feeling like I have a good adoption of the tool. And then there's like this reference ability that I find falls off very often, where it's like, yeah, I mean, I went through that course. The course was amazing, but like I'm not going to like go through 17 modules to get an answer to my questions. And one of the things I noticed that HubSpot did an incredible job with, I've seen this in Airtable as well, which is like it's so modular down to the point where it's like just that same content can be sort of referenced and pulled out, and it's surfaceable in multiple areas. So it's not like, you know, I'm in my job, I have to get this done today. Like I'm not going to carve out 2 hours to like find that specific video. I need it to be like searched and indexed and where I'm kind of already going, almost from like the support and documentation hub standpoint. I've noticed both those orgs do a great job at that. Anything you'd add?
No, I mean, I think you're spot on, right? Like, hey, ultimately, Academy is just one delivery mechanism. All right, we're going to bring them into an LMS, and we're going to have like super formalized learning paths for every persona. That's one mechanism, right? Really, you should be thinking about like, okay, how do I get education everywhere? Right. And so maybe it is on the Academy. How do we sort, tag, filter? How can I bring somebody into the specific course or specific video or specific tutorial that they need? Right. And there's a whole like tagging and naming, you know, approach to that. We also, you know, make sure to enable our internal teams. Right. So if somebody does have a CSM or their account executive or they've engaged support, and we've done a ton of training and we've built a lot of resources internally to help folks like narrow down to the right learning assets, so they can really effectively point their customers or those users to the right place. I think there's a means in which you can surface this type of education in the product, right? Hey, if you click over to the HubSpot workflows tool for the very first time, how are you showing them that there's a video that walks through how to build your first workflow, right? Or what does it mean to build a form in the Airtable form builder, right? And so it's like, how do you expose that stuff there? And then we naturally believe tying this all together through our other digital programs. And so, you know, our digital success team has a whole onboarding flow and email flow for users. And we overlay a ton of Academy resources to that. We're bridging the gap between Academy and community, so you can learn here, but learn from others, or like apply the context of an interest or vertical-based user group right on top of that. So yeah, I mean, all of that to be said, the LMS is one place people can go. Your job should be surfacing education everywhere somebody would find value in learning, right?
Well said. Well said. Yeah, community piece, I want to come back to that in a moment here. I think that's a good way to kind of think about the scale version of this, because to me, I find that after that content is built, we kind of have that ability to have a community grown where others can have that peer sharing. As we're kind of closing out on the concept of the content itself and maybe curriculum feedback, let's just talk about like how you've elicited that. What does that look like for your orgs?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's like the short answer is like, well, yeah, you should just attach surveys to your learning assets and quantitative and qualitative, capture that, analyze it, and action it, right? I think it's easier said than done, right? It's like, all right, let's create the channel, but then how do we actually like operationalize that at scale? At least at Airtable, we do attach an Airtable survey form at the end of every course. Again, because it's an Airtable form, that's going to automatically pull this feedback into our Academy Airtable base, right? It can automatically be associated to that course. And if and as needed, right, feedback can easily convert into a project for our prioritization queue, right? So we've integrated the product roadmap, we've integrated customer feedback, and so it becomes like a really, frictionless process for prioritizing and building out our sprints, right? Going back to creator capacity. Few things. I think AI is such a low-hanging fruit use case for AI, right? Every survey that comes in with AI's help, right, we can have low sentiment or like urgency brought right to the top of the queue, right? So of the 6,000 survey responses we've had since launch, every single one we go through, we're starting with the ones that seem to be like the most pressing, most urgent, or like most disruptive to the user experience. So it's just like a prioritization thing, right? And then on the other side with AI, right, we actually have a trigger built in where if the average CSAT from these surveys on a particular course drops too low to our liking, right, it'll be flagged for us, right? It'll jump right into that prioritization queue. But AI also summarizes all of the survey results from that course and gives us like an initial crack at like, hey, here is how I would go ahead. here's how I would update that course, or here's how I would rectify the issues that we've uncovered from customer feedback. So again, AI is huge here, but you just have to build the process for capturing feedback. Surveys are the easiest, but then like be committed to and operationalize, right, the analysis, synthesis, and have that drive, where you put your time and efforts.
Yeah, what a great application of AI, the ability to be able to scan things quickly, be able to have the summarization. I didn't really even think about the sort of predictive nature of going like, here's what I recommend doing, right? Talk about like writing the outline for the script of the next video you need to make, right? Because it's pulling right off of the sentiment, the analysis, and like that body of work that it's evaluating. Really interesting. I think that that's a great call out because I know that those CE and community teams often have the same blank slate challenge. Like, okay, we built like the baseline there, but then it's like, well, what is that next thing? And customers don't always do a great job of telling you what they need. They'll tell you what's wrong. They'll tell you where they're stuck. They'll tell you and ask the same question over and over, but often they don't. It's like, Dunning-Kruger, right? They don't know what they don't know. And so they're not going to go like, please build this specific video for me. So I love that loop of powering the future because of that analysis. That's really interesting.
Yeah, and I think everyone can say like, oh man, where I plug in generative AI is that like it helps me draft out content, right? Like I think everyone, that's like the entry point for generative AI at this point. It's a slippery slope in that like, is it going to anchor to the current state of your product and like truly like accuracy to like what the journey is like? So that's always, you got to be careful with that. I think that there's ways to really improve that nature of it. But I find the power with AI specifically, like where we feel it the most are like those invisible labor tasks, right? And so like, yeah, I know what my creator capacity is. I know how much time maybe it's going to take me to create a video or to like embed an IRAD tutorial. But what about like all of the analysis of the feedback that comes in? What about like all of the internal enablement copy across all the different channels we alert internal teams? What's the external promotion look like? Newsletter burbs, LinkedIn posts, right? Like marketing for customer education is such a lift, but it never gets factored in for like, oh, what's our bandwidth? And so again, like I think AI, another huge use case. We use it a ton for this where because our catalog is captured in our Airtable base, we have the feedback, we have the course information, we have the transcripts uploaded as PDFs. AI knows exactly what we need it to reference and say, but then it's outputting marketing or promotional messages relevant to the audience and relevant to the channel. So it's like, okay, with a click of a button now, not hours of writing, we have a Slack message to our customer success team. We have an email template for our sales reps to use. We have a blurb for our monthly scaled CS newsletter, right? We have a LinkedIn post. We have and so again, invisible labor is where you should be thinking about AI. I don't think that question was about AI, but to the hey, where do we go next? What do we do next? Like, AI is such a huge efficiency gain.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is certainly a better way to answer a question via the application of AI than how are you using AI? Then you just like convolutedly kind of shove a bunch of stuff into the answer to the question. So I think it's a much better way to describe it via the process that you use and the methodology you guys employ. So I think that's fantastic.
And John, to the point of, where do you go next? I would also just anchor back to that reporting framework, right? Like go down the categories, right? Where, if feedback is low, right? That's like somewhere, learner sentiment, if not also learner experience. And so do not pass go until we rectify that issue. So it's like, all right, we have to address the course or courses or resources that are hurting us at the learning sentiment category, right? Once we can rectify that, okay, now let's see where the next metric isn't performing the way we want it to, right? Like the reporting framework should be your health score, your scorecard to like, all right, where do we enhance, optimize, improve? How do we inform our roadmap? And it's like, go down the line and where's the failure point, right?
Yeah, that's fantastic. I really like that call out. So as we kind of wrap up here, we talk about the scale side of this. I know you've recently sort of taken under your belt the community side of this, right? So not just Customer Academy where we have self-serve content, but we're using AI to maybe help, with summarization, those sort of things. What I always found is a unique nuance that AI is not there yet, which is the application for a specific use case, an industry, a workaround, just something like a broad community function to be able to pull in power users down to net new users. And this like virality of having third-party validation and sharing this content, this thing that AI can certainly support, but I really like this idea of where customer education is going and this like CX function, which is communities. So I'd love to just kind of hear like what that transition's been like for you guys.
Yeah, I mean, the more that folks leverage generative AI to like help write content, emails, newsletters, LinkedIn posts, community posts, like it's starting to it's going to drive like a sea of sameness of just like tone and voice and content structure. Like I was always an M dash guy. Right. And now everyone's saying that AI uses a ton of M dashes. So now I'm on my back foot to be like, no, I'm a big M dash guy. And so anyways, that being said, I think like the importance of like community and like real human experience, at least for our example, like the power of Airtable, or like the value add or the unlocks that it's brought to them, their work, their workflows, their team, their business, etc. So, we found it complements the Academy really well, because again, our curriculum is foundational. Here's how you implement. Here's how you onboard. Here's how you get started. Here are like the huge milestones that you'd want to achieve over your introduction to the product. We'll never be able to cover every single use case or every single industry example. And it's like, yeah, that's where community thrives. It stacks on top, where it's like, okay, yeah, you have the basics, you have the foundation. Here's something wildly innovative I've done because I'm a higher ed customer and I needed to like track donors or blah, 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 or wow, like, I've completely transformed the campaign management process at my company, from creative intake to like, project distribution to like, waterfall project management creation to like executive dashboards, due date expiration notifications that we've pushed into Slack. Like, I don't know, dude, there's a ton of stuff that like we can't capture all of that, but like community is the place that we're trying to help be that complement, and we've seen a ton of value.
That's a beautiful thing. Yeah, I know you guys are using the Gainsight Communities product to try to help kind of consolidate a lot of that. And again, the nuances of these different industries and use cases, I think that's a beautiful way to leverage that. Just thinking about how that helps maybe inform your team. Are there feedback loops that get back to you about like, hey, it seems like we're hearing this a lot, or we're hearing the same question. How do you guys think about that?
Yeah, we've been, now that we have this sort of like formalize, like, okay, we have all these like key courses, the foundations are there for end users, for the builders, for like admins at our enterprise segment, like that stuff's there. We know the community is doing a ton of like innovation and ideation and like providing that extra lens. We're trying to figure out how to actually pull that into the Academy in some way too, to like close the loop back around. And so, we're still trying to wrap our head around it, but we want to complement the Academy curriculum with almost like imagine like more like a YouTube channel. And it's like, hey, these aren't going to string together necessarily, but we just want to try and capture bite-sized, bingeable videos on all sorts of feature and function drill downs, but also like use cases that map to common verticals and industries and business functions. And so we're hoping to inform that roadmap by what the community is sharing and talking about, like what's latching on with the community. We also hope eventually to like invite in the community members themselves to help co-create that content. Like, I don't think the Academy team has to gatekeep content creation. And so hopefully this also becomes like a platform or a, collaborative program experience where, hey, you foundationally learn with Academy, you peer-to-peer support and grow and learn together in community. And then we bring it back over to Formalize for more learners again, right? I think you said flywheel at the beginning of this, and maybe that's our flywheel.
Yeah, that was going to be my next word to close us out here. I think that's a beautiful system, right? The ability to have a foundation that we create based on that user insight and customer journey, capturing this into academies, having repositories, having systems to maintain and manage, all the way through to the maturity curve where we have a community where we have external folks who will pull in insights that we could never possibly surface as not being practitioners ourselves, having that implement and help us design the next set of programs and things we build. So I think that's just a beautiful way to think about this. So well said. I think that's incredible. So as we wrap up here, Kevin, this is super helpful, man. I think there's a ton of value in everything you shared. Really appreciate you taking some time to kind of break all this down. You're an incredible follow. I've heard you speak in multiple places. I think I'm a little biased, but I think you do an incredible job of really just blending in that little bit of personality and not making it feel very rigid. So always enjoyed that. Where can folks find more about you or see more of your content apart from some of the industry stuff you do?
Yeah, man. So, I mean, LinkedIn's probably the best place to find me. I think it's just like Kev-Dunn, always love to just like, connect with others. Maybe you're in the education space, community space. I also love when folks like are just super upfront with like, hey man, We tackle it a completely different way, right? And so it's like I'm always open to hearing like no two academies, no two programs are the same. And so would love to have that discussion. And you can find me on LinkedIn for that. And then, if this is the shameless plug section of the content, I would definitely check out Airtable Academy. We just launched that learning path on AI, a certification on building Airtable apps that are powered by AI. And then, we just relaunched the community. So community.airtable. And obviously I have profiles in both of those places. Come find me.
Awesome. Appreciate this. We'll link to all that stuff. Kevin, thanks again for being here, man. This is great.
Of course, man. So much fun. Again, love talking about this stuff. I think with academies and customer education, you tackle it with really like adult learning theory and like instructional design best practices. And then you have the other side that's like program and process and systems. And so I think, we're just trying to find the proper blend of the two. And so, love always unpacking it. And anybody that wants to hear a reporting framework, dude, count me in. So appreciate it, man. Thanks for the time.
Nerd out on any of that stuff. This is awesome. All right. Thanks again, Kevin. Appreciate this.
You bet. Yep. Take it easy.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Adoption Curve. If you've enjoyed today's conversation and want more content like this, I highly recommend subscribing to our newsletter where we break down insights, frameworks, and templates from our guests on each show. To access, go to iorad.com/newsletter. Also, make sure you subscribe to our show wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. If you could, we'd also love it if you could leave us a 5-star review if you enjoyed and got value out of today's conversation. The Adoption Curve is produced by IORAD, the tool that helps thousands of companies make interactive tutorials in seconds. They're shareable in all the tools you use every day. We'll see you on the next episode.